Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the monastery, the open bar of the internet, the world's greatest shit show, and the place where we, the good brothers and sisters of this most holy of temples, seek enlightenment through the drunkest, craziest, and most batshit ways possible. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me, I have a newcomer into the temple. The madman behind the Unbound role-playing game, head of Big Chair Gaming, the one and only Lex. How you doing today, man? Or tonight, technically.
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on and braving time zone hell. So, I usually start these things with a little tradition, that being the humble beginnings, the origin story, depending on who you ask, the villain origin story. So, with that in mind, I'd like you to walk me through your introduction to role-playing games and what made it stick.
Well, honestly, that is probably more of a villain story, or it could have been a villain story. My first foray into tabletop games was with Pathfinder First Edition about 14 years ago. I won't go too far into it, but that campaign ended terribly and is the epitome of no D&D is better than bad D&D. It was at that point that I didn't play again for probably another 4 years until I was in my early 20s. And over the next 5 years at that point, I met what I would say my core gaming group and my group of very close friends. And we played almost exclusively Pathfinder First Edition. And we played what some would call hardcore D&D. Looking back on it, the games weren't great, but we had fun. And there were shenanigans and whatnot. But the thing that drew me to tabletop games in general was the creative freedom to explore fantastical worlds in different ways and be who you want to be, or even those who you don't want to be, but you want to imagine from their point of view. And that was kind of how I got started. And honestly, seeing the worst that tabletop games had to offer. And even then, it didn't push me away.
Wait, the worst that it had to offer. You read through Fatal?
I have read through Fatal, and I do regret reading it. But I imagine I'm a better designer having read it and knowing what not to do.
And I suppose that's certainly a possibility. And to everyone watching, yes, I'm aware I do seem to sound a bit quiet. My volume control has been and always will be the bane of my existence. But hopefully I'm going to move this a little bit closer. Hopefully that fixes the matter. But of course, on the other hand, I'll probably have somebody yelling at me about being too loud. Okay, sorry about that. But with that in mind, I'd like to delve into the chain of events that led to the creation of Unbound, was it a case of taking a particular system and house ruling it until you ended up crossing the threshold into being a whole new game, or was there a different route?
Well, that is part of it. The origins of Unbound are slightly complicated. It came from two parts. One, my core gaming table originally played with a professional dungeon master. He who shall not be named, I'll just say he was probably one of the biggest online GMs who did things that weren't great and rightfully lost his career over it. He was our private dungeon master before becoming a streamer, and pursuing that career path.
Mm-hmm.
And right before that, 5e had really started coming into the main zeitgeist to Critical Role and other things, and most of our other tables were moving to 5e. It was at that point where our table had lost our primary dungeon master, who we had played with for years, and all other tables were moving to 5e. And for various reasons, our table just didn't enjoy 5e. It was a fine game. It served its purpose. But there wasn't enough there for us. It was at that point I and a couple friends started creating homebrew for Pathfinder 1st Edition, which is what our gaming group was most familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
But Pathfinder and a lot of older school D20 systems have issues that once you really learn the game, it becomes very easy to break the game. So we began homebrewing a lot of things and actually running the game from a perspective of two different home rules. The Epic 6 theory of D&D and Gestalt D&D, if you're familiar with those.
Oh yeah, I've seen E6, I've seen Gestalt, even messed around with Sacred Barbecue a few times.
Yeah, so we actually combined those together for our gaming table initially.
Mm-hmm.
It was during that time, and this was about 7 years ago at this point, where various people at our table were running different games using this rule set. And another friend of ours made a side rule that was basically, hey, what if we got rid of class levels?
Mm-hmm.
And I took that rule, and I'm like, okay, what would it look like if I applied that to everything? And so I did. I started deconstructing classes and taking class features and giving them a point value that players could purchase. And just, it kind of evolved from there. And after about 3 years of just homebrew private table games, COVID hit.
Mm-hmm.
And with isolation, suddenly a lot more people wanted to play games, and everyone had a lot more time. During that time, I was struggling with the problem of magic not really working with our system. And I made a homebrew rule simply called Unbound Magic. It was rough, but an instant hit at all of our tables.
Mm-hmm.
And that is actually where we got the name of the system, Unbound. Because I took the design philosophy from that rule set and started applying it to the entirety of the game. It was then a couple of years later, me and a close friend, working on rules together, decided, hey, this could actually be a game we publish.
Mm-hmm.
And we've kind of been working in that direction ever since.
Oh yeah. Now, there's been a few attempts to take the D20 system and go classless, so, with some very mixed results, I will admit. But it seems that one of the things that that going from Pathfinder to this, I'm glad I don't see, is, unless I'm mistaken, you guys are using a mana point approach instead of using the Vancian model.
Indeed, for spellcasting, we have gotten rid of the traditional spell slots and are using a resource-based approach, because that fits in more with our free-form modular design philosophy that comes from a class and traditionally level-free system. But one of our big focuses has been, while we are modular and we are class-free, we still want to maintain the identity of certain archetypes in a very recognizable and traditional way. Because that's where we felt a lot of other similar systems kind of lost a lot of players, is everything became too homogenous, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Which we're trying to do the opposite, where every mechanic has a very unique and visible identity, at least within reason.
Mm-hmm. Which I'm perfectly fine with. And as far as the loss of the traditional Vancian model, as I've stated many times with it, rest in piss, you won't be missed. Because I hated that model when I started, and I haven't stopped hating it. And for a bit of context, I started with the Black Book era of AD&D, so mid to late 90s. So the last few years of TSR, and the first few years of the post-TSR era. But one thing I am a bit curious about, given the, just the title of it being Unbound and the like, are you planning on going with a defined setting when it comes to the game, or are you going with the more implied setting / theme approach?
A bit of both. We are making all the mechanics of the system to be setting neutral. However, we are making and releasing a setting alongside of it when we publish, or maybe soon after, depending on how much we get done by then. And a lot of the things in the system you will be able to see in the setting and vice versa. I won't say the setting doesn't influence certain aspects of specific talent trees, but for the most part, they're written with enough vagueness that you can easily transfer, tweak, or reflavor for any setting. One of the things we actually plan to do is once we publish, all mechanical rule sets will be available for free online forever. By buying the books, you will be buying for more of the flavor and the lore that comes from our setting, as well as all the in-book art and other things that might give you a bit more inspiration than just a block of text.
Yeah.
But we want the game to be playable by anyone without having to rely on a bootleg copy or a third-party SRD.
Especially since the well was poisoned when it came to SRDs after and open licenses after the whole OGL fiasco a couple years ago.
Indeed.
Yeah, I was at ground zero for that. It was a particular bit of chaos being in Zoom calls 3 times a day for about 2 weeks. But I will note when I was going through things like the traditions, something that I found kind of interesting was the introduction of martial traditions. It did end up making me laugh, not at the expense of it, but just being validated over something that I had said years ago. Because I feel that martial characters in a lot of the bigger fantasy games get the short end of the stick. And I'm guessing the design with martial traditions was a way to address that while also keeping with that full customization that you're going for.
Indeed, and I do agree. Martial characters in most traditional D20 systems, their primary balance point is consistency and not having resources. However, a lot of the times, players get bored with that. And it kind of goes back to one of the big reasons I decided to start working on this system in earnest is every player, new or old, eventually feels restricted by the rule set or whatever system they're playing. And I wanted to try to alleviate that as much as possible. And martial classes, I think, are the epitome of that design problem. And by treating martial classes as more than just I have a sword, just as an oversimplification, and by giving them even potentially more avenues and majors, and letting them do unique and powerful things while keeping the numbers lower, you can make very interesting characters that don't rely on a class feature that is just a reflavored spell-like ability. And truly give them something unique that mages might be able to achieve, but maybe not as easily or in a different way.
Yeah. Ultimately, I think it comes down to, I know that there's the stability argument with martials, but it does feel a little bit deflating when everyone else has some degree of versatility and the martial has just this one thing that even when combat comes along, that's the only thing they can do, and everyone else has that versatility both in and out of combat. Is what leads to that bit of deflation. There's though I know that to a certain extent it's because in some of the playtest groups, the anytime the marshals would get anything interesting, the mage characters would players would pitch a fit in those playtest groups. I have word of God on that. But this kind of thing also goes into skills. Now, you and I are both familiar with Pathfinder First Edition, which had a very similar massive skill list from D&D 3.5. So I'm curious if one of the goals you had was not to simplify the skill list, but to give it more of a spotlight, so it wasn't as granular.
Partially. Uh, since the system originated in its earliest iteration as a homebrew for Pathfinder First Edition, we originally did adopt that massive skill list. And our skill list is still quite big compared to other systems. But basically, when really going into the design of, okay, we don't have levels, how are we going to handle caster levels, or base attack bonus, or proficiency tiers, or anything of the like? I came to the decision of, what if we just had everything scale based on the rank of your skills? And that eventually led us to where we currently are, where we have 3 different categories of skills. And within those skills themselves, there is actually things called expertise. So you can be trained in knowledge, as an example, but then there is multiple expertises within that skill that you can specialize. And by doing that, we are able to maintain the granular nature of, I'm really good at this specific thing, but while simplifying it in a way that you can have a smaller list and have general use of skills without having the issue where it's just like Pathfinder 1 came in, where some skills were only useful when they came up, and then if they never came up, well, why did I ever take that skill? And that's actually expanded kind of into everything, including like martial skills. We were talking about martial traditions. In order to train in the tradition, you take expertise in that specific category of weaponry, as an example. Or you can be a jack of all trades and just be skilled in everything, but specialize in nothing. And that's still a viable character.
Yeah, what you're describing sounds not too far removed from the skill group system that was brought up in Shadowrun. I believe it was Shadowrun 5th edition, where they started introducing these skill groups that you could level up, or individual skills. So you do have that kind of specific and general approach.
Indeed, and we did take some inspiration from that gave us that initial idea. Right? And that's one thing. Even though we are a traditional D20 system, we're not afraid to take ideas from any other type of system and see if they can work with what we're aiming for. We're not limiting ourselves to a specific category.
Oh yeah. And given that, one thing I am curious about, since this is ostensibly a XP based set up. If you already have this, feel free to make note of it. But do you plan on having a sidebar for if people want to start a bit more advanced, if they want to start at a higher level than just base character creation? What the XP budget might be in that case?
Yes, we kind of already have that to a certain degree. We don't have explicit like recommendations, but the game is broken up into what we call tiers of play, and to reach a tier of play requires you to earn and expend a certain amount of experience. And so it would be very easy for a game master to say, hey, I want to start this campaign a bit later, and they can see, okay, what tier of play do I want them to be at?
Mm-hmm.
And say, okay, you start here. And then that will predetermine how much experience the players get.
Yeah.
So that is kind of already solved by how our tiers of play work.
Mm-hmm. So when it comes to those tiers, I'd like to try to do a game of parallels, if you don't mind.
Of course.
I'd like you to go from bottom to top, as far as what sort of characters in fiction would be what you would consider a rough equivalent to that kind of tier, if you don't mind.
Ooh, that is a bit difficult. But I think, based on our design history, and just let me go over the different tiers really quick for context. We have 5 tiers, which follows the apprentice, journeyman, professional, master, and grandmaster models of how everything's flavored. An apprentice is where you start. And I would say between apprentice and going into journeyman, the mid to upper end of journeyman, or I would say like journeyman, a little bit into journeyman, is probably Gandalf the Grey, right? Kind of, and that kind of leads into going back to the Epic 6 theory of Gandalf was a 6th level wizard in the Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're going to compare it to D&D, that's roughly, when you're hitting journeyman, you could say you're roughly 6th level, 5th, 6th level.
Mm-hmm.
It's not perfectly equivalent. I would then say, as the power scale increases, it's not exactly a perfect equivalent, but I would say professional and master, definitely going into master, kind of grouping that stretch together, would be like a prime John Constantine type character.
Mm-hmm.
So you go from kind of Gandalf, and at that point you're kind of evolving maybe towards prime Gandalf, and then into like Gandalf the White, into like a John Constantine, binding devils to your bidding, jumping through different dimensions.
Mm-hmm.
You can definitely achieve that level of power going into master. Going beyond that, it gets a bit difficult. I'm trying to think of a good example, because the strange thing with how the system has kind of evolved into its own beast is you can have characters that on first glance, be at the same tier of play, may look like they're at wildly different levels of power.
Mm-hmm.
But at the table, one doesn't feel weaker than the other.
And to that point, I'd like to shift a bit into the bestiary side of things, because since you aren't doing levels, this also brings the question of the equivalent of say challenge levels and how those kind of things operate.
Yes. So our bestiary is still early work in progress. We're trying to kind of figure out exactly how we're approaching certain things. But our goal is to provide a framework for game masters to kind of build their own creatures. We want to have a system in place to do that because we've never really seen a mainstream tabletop game achieve that successfully. And that adds a level of complexity that makes the traditional CR system a bit difficult. So we're actually going to be focusing more on the encounter design than the threat level of individual creatures is what we're starting to pivot to. Because a lot, and this is in a wanting to help newer game masters when they pick up their system. I've known people who they see the CR of a creature and not exactly understand the power level of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so instead, our creatures are going to be broken up into tiers of play like players, but we're going to focus more heavily on giving tools to design encounters. And so not all the threat and challenge is from the creature, but also giving guide rails for like we're looking into doing different roles of creatures as an example. So one might have the warrior tag, one might have the crowd control tag.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on the type of account you want to design, it may recommend you only have a certain number of creatures of each type. And so that will help design things without. The reality is, it's virtually impossible to have a perfect challenge rating system. So we would rather focus on tools that teach you kind of how to look at designing rather than just follow a pre-designated number.
Yeah, I can get that. If I'm being honest, I've always had a bit of an issue with challenge rating for making certain assumptions. Chief among them, that idea of a balanced party of 4. When obviously from a design perspective, you have no way of knowing how big or small the table is going to be, or how balanced or unbalanced it's going to be in the same vein. So it's
Indeed, and when we're working on the game master and the bestiary side of it, we're looking more at, and this goes to other design aspects of maybe we shouldn't try to balance that part of it, and instead give the players and the GMs the tools that more understand why something may feel deadlier than something else, even though traditionally they have the same challenge rating. But once you understand that, you can take our design your own creature system, and it will be a lot easier to really build what you're intending rather than just hoping something fits.
Mm-hmm. So, with that kind of thing in mind, uh, do you plan on putting in some sort of guideline or the like for building creatures?
Indeed, I briefly mentioned it, but we are planning to have a robust rule set for designing custom creatures that give game masters a baseline in making custom creatures. We're going to have a big list of examples and pre-made creatures and the like,
Mm-hmm.
but we find it's important to have written tools for how to make your own, because I'm sure every GM out there has had an experience where they wanted to make a custom creature and they get to the table and oh no, I'm killing my players. Uh oh. Every is always a rite of passage.
Mm-hmm.
But also all other like mainstream systems don't really have they don't really show behind the curtain to a level that is helpful when it comes to designing creatures. But with the modular nature of every other part of Unbound, we felt it would be appropriate to also have a monster builder in the system.
Mm-hmm. Which I could certainly see that. And within what you had sent me, there were a total of 4 different PDFs, and I know these are more internal things. These aren't going to be the published version, but there was the player's guide, the GM's guide, and the XP shop. Um, with the XP shop, was is that something that is planned for the full book, or is that something that was specifically for the internal testing?
So that is the XP shop is our internal document of every ability we've made in the game.
Mm-hmm.
When we publish, the content that will not everything in that book will be in the core set, but the content from that book that is published will be combined with the player's guide.
Mm-hmm.
It was more of an issue of the documents were getting too big and hard to navigate, so we split them up for playtest purposes.
Yeah, that would certainly make sense. Uh, Now, do you have plans on putting out a demo or anything like that in in the near future? Did I lose you?
My apologies, sorry. Uh, a dog was barking. Um, but no, all our documents are actually currently available uh, for anyone who wants to play them as a beta, so to speak. As we are constantly taking feedback and actually have a live errata on our server as we update rules. Um, Hopefully, in the nearest future, it's hard to give an exact timeline because design goes ebbs and flows in its process. We do plan on doing a larger public playtest where we are actually planning on hiring the service of Pesto Publishing, if you've heard of him. He does uh, professional playtesting. And alongside him, we plan to get a lot more input. And once we get closer to being ready for that.
Mm-hmm. Which I could definitely get. I could definitely get that, and I'll look forward to seeing how the book develops in the coming months. But with that said, I do want to sincerely thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come all the way to my monastery and enjoy the madness that happens around here.
Of course. Happy to come on.
And anytime you see fit to return, the door is always open. As I often say around here, drinking is not mandatory, but it is encouraged. And, of course, a sincere thanks to everyone, including all of the many newcomers who took the time out of their schedule to come onto this show and enjoy the madness. And there will be plenty more where that came from, as there always is here, on the open bar of the internet. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra, I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody!
Yeah.